It's time, right at noon here. Thank you everyone for joining us and welcome to the April Leaders Learning Live webinar. So we do these webinars every third Thursday of the month at noon, from noon to 1. And Leaders Learning Live is presented by the SUNY Sale Institute, and we do leadership development programming for faculty, staff, and students across the system. And my name is Marissa McCasty. I'm the Leadership Development Manager for the SUNY Sale Institute. So welcome to those who have never attended one of these, and welcome back to our fan base. If you have been joining every month, we thank you for your loyalty. And just a couple housekeeping items. We are going to be recording this webinar, so if you want to view it after this, we will have it on our SUNY Sale website. Now I'll have the link at the end of this interview. And also, if you have any sort of questions that you would like to ask Joyce Akinmola, she's our graduate assistant, she'll be managing the chat. So we will try to get to as many questions as we can. So thank you, Joyce, for that. And I guess we can just get started, right? Thank you for joining us. With everything that's going on with the current pandemic, everyone's looking for resources and spaces to gain knowledge in order to become better leaders within our roles during this very challenging time. And we have all been forced to learn a lot really quickly. And we hope that this discussion around emergency preparedness, putting plans into action, will allow you to learn what it takes to learn about different levels of emergencies, and to help you to put those plans into action, and to help calm any sort of community fears or even fears within yourself. And we are fortunate to have 4 experts with us today. And I want to thank them because normally they are busy, but I'm sure they are busier than ever. So to take out, this hour to speak with us is huge. So thank you for that. And with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We have Stephen Conard. He is the Emergency Management Coordinator and Adjunct Professor within the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity at University at Albany. And then we have Sean Moriarty, who is the Chief Technology Officer at SUNY Oswego. We also have Christy Smith, who's the Assistant Dean for Academics and Assessment in the School of Education at the University at Albany. And we have Larry Zacarese, who is the Assistant Chief of Police and the Director of the Office of Emergency Management at Stony Brook. So thank you all for being here. So I wanted to really get to know you all as within your roles. So if Stephen, you could start and talk a little bit about your role on campus as it relates to emergency preparedness.
Sure, thank you very much, Marissa, and good afternoon, everybody. I am just about 8 months into my career here at University at Albany. I got here on July 1st from previously working a decade at the State of Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency. On campus, what I'm pretty much, it's a newly created position, but it is an old function of the university. So here I am pretty much the center of the wheel, so the hub, if you will, to really make sure that all of the spokes, the departments and divisions are able to function, or at least identify what needs to be functioned during an emergency. When we started in July, we had a tabletop exercise, which is a discussion-based exercise where you can go over some plans, and our topic was a measles outbreak. So we actually had an interesting perspective to lead us into this current outbreak that we are dealing with the pandemic. But here I also support our executive council and their decisions from the policy level, just as much down to the functional level as well. So that is pretty much just a quick piece for me.
Thank you, Stephen. And Christy?
Sure. In addition to being the Assistant Dean in the School of Education, I work in collaboration with the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, which we call CEHC for short. It's a very long name, at the University of Albany, in leading an initiative for safe schools. And this term safe schools is across the entire spectrum, so P through 20. So the elementary, secondary schools, pre-K, and then up and through colleges. And that initiative is involved with a couple pieces, one with the summit, which I think I might get a chance to talk a little bit about later. But then also other activities that we are working on, including research and working with our community partners to ensure safe, prepared, and effective learning environments throughout not only our own campus, the Capital District, and throughout New York State. So I'm working on not only the summit piece for that, but also other activities involving emergency preparedness across all the grade levels and learning environments in a broad term. So yes, the typical college campus, K-12, but also after school programs, public libraries, daycares, pre-Ks. So it's the kind of larger learning environment definition than just what people typically think of as a K-12 or the higher ed school.
Thank you. And Sean?
Hi, Sean Moriarty, Chief Technology Officer at SUNY Oswego, and I'm also the chair of the SUNY Council of CIOs. At our campus, we've really looked at how we can be prepared from an IT point of view, and so I've served on a couple of committees in terms of emergency preparedness, and we had looked at for medical services, and we've worked with our campus police, university police group too, and actually our IT department, we had started doing planning, and on December 18th, we had our own disaster day, which was intended to be some planning around tabletop exercise if we had a IT disaster and how we would go and handle that. So we've been preparing slowly and looking at how we can go and reduce risk, particularly around the IT side, but also how it coordinates to the rest of the campus.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here, Sean. And Larry?
Good afternoon, everyone. I've been here in my current role. Actually, June will be 11 years. Coming up on just about 27 years of combined law enforcement, EMS, and emergency management service. You know, my first foray into pandemic planning was actually, interestingly, not too long after I arrived here in 2009. H1N1 was the public health emergency we were preparing for and working around at the time. Certainly much different epidemiologically. You know, there was a vaccine and many different things, but a lot of similarities in that the planning, the campus posture, and all the things we were preparing for. So, you know, back at the end of January, early February, we began to, I'll say, dust off those plans and really stand up our senior executive planning committee, as well as our broad-based sort of mid-level manager planning group, which really had representation from every area you could think of: academics, IT, law enforcement, environmental health and safety, facilities, student life, res life, everything you could think of that would really be needed to support the planning for and, you know, the approach to handling what we thought would be the case around COVID, and certainly, as I'm sure we'll delve further into throughout this call and this presentation. Not how wrong we were, but how we've had to adjust our plans and pivot on the fly in a lot of different ways that no one could have ever imagined, I think. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that many people on this call are in similar situations of needing to pivot. So we hope that this is helpful for everyone here today. So this discussion or topic around emergency preparedness was actually inspired by an event that some of the SAIL team had attended that Christy Smith actually put on in last August, I believe, right? And the event that she was just mentioning, the Safe, Prepared, and Effective Learning Environment Summit, that was hosted at Albany. And when we were there, it was very eye-opening because we were able to see the different levels of emergencies and how many people needed to be involved in that. And this was even before the pandemic, so it was on our radar, but it's definitely very timely. So Christy, could you talk a little bit about your event and what needed to go into it, different stakeholders, and how you decided on the focus for it?
Sure. When planning the event, there was a couple things we wanted to focus on. One, we wanted to focus on preparation, response, and recovery for all incidences. Even before the recent events, typically people we're looking at planning for incidences of mass violence, so school shootings, large attacks along those lines. And it's great to prepare for those, obviously, but there are other incidences like we're encountering right now: infectious disease, natural weather environments, incidences. We're in New York, so snow is obviously something we all prepare for. However, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, these are all activities that do happen in New York and that we do need to prepare for. So we did want to focus on kind of a wide variety of incidences, so to help people look beyond just preparing for the incidences of mass violence. We also, like I mentioned too, from my background, it's a P20 activity, and anything that happens, let's say in a K-12 school, specifically like a high school, could affect a local university or a local college. Anything that happens specifically on a local college campus could affect the K through 12 schools nearby. One of the college prior to the current COVID incident had a mumps outbreak. And so obviously that affected their student teachers that were in the K through 12 schools. So because they had student teachers that were working with children in pre-K. So if the student teachers were exposed to mumps, they could bring it to the schools. So we did want to bring that P20 perspective for the summit, but we also wanted to make sure we included all stakeholders. And based on the response for the current pandemic, you can see how all the current stakeholders have been coming together to help everyone. And the current pandemic obviously is affecting everyone, but when you're looking at an incident just on your own campus, sometimes it's hard to see how other stakeholders might be affected. But for the summit, we wanted to make sure that parents and guardians were included, first responders, community organizations, community leaders, mental health experts. We invited our own students, and we encouraged age-appropriate students from the K through 12 age group too, because it is a full community effort when there's an incident of some kind or a response needs to happen. Even so far as transportation beyond, if you're in a K-12 system or a college with its own transportation on its own campus, how is CDTA or the public buses affected by the incident on your campus? So we did want to kind of bring that large all stakeholders group together, because in a response and recovery, those are all the parties that are involved. And we did want to bring again that large overview of multiple types of instances to prepare and respond for, because in reality, that is what could happen. There's a wide variety, and unfortunately we can't predict what could happen. So to be prepared to respond and recover and hopefully prevent and mitigate, through a wide variety of activities, we wanted to do that to make sure that people had some sort of at least skill set or tools to be able to start planning for all different types. And we were not thinking, obviously, 9 months ahead that there'd be a large pandemic, but hopefully some of the tools they were able to bring back and apply kind of in this this current era. So it was, again, there's that kind of broad prepare for everything, hopefully never use it type of situation.
Thank you. Yes, it was a great event, and I know that a lot of planning went into that event just in itself. So, and it inspired this discussion. So thank you for your work on that. So I guess this next question I'll ask to Stephen, Larry, and Sean about who needs to be considered when you're putting an emergency plan in place. Do you have any strategies or steps that you take?
So yeah, I'll just start quick with that. Similar to how Larry had mentioned, I stood up an incident management team here at the university that was kind of the core day-to-day meeting quarterly group that had membership from all areas, including academic. But with that, you have to, what are you planning for? So to Christy's point of, you just plan for everything. Well, to do that, you can start with a risk assessment. What are you at most risk for of experiencing? But you can't look at some of the areas that have a lower risk or consequence, similar to a pandemic, for frequency. So that's why certain pieces you want to develop memoranda with it. So it's not just looking at your campus. Obviously, coming from me on a state campus here, so I look at our community around it. We actually sit on 2 communities. So I work very closely with our county organizations as well as the state, because we have that luxury of being in Albany at the state capital area. So definitely making sure it's beyond our community here, as well as having representation from our leadership to ensure that the risks we're considering are able to feed into a comprehensive campus emergency management plan.
Thank you. And Larry, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just echo that, and I'll say, we've been hearing the term and using the term all hazards preparedness, for years now, and in the emergency management business. And I think for the most part, a lot of us have, with the exception of climate related differences throughout the state, the higher ed spaces, everyone's planning for sort of the same portfolio of risks, if you will. So the infrastructure was in place, to Stephen's point, and our traditional, incident management, incident command systems were, exercised frequently, and whether it's a flood or a fire or campus-wide power outage or protests or, whatever we have going on. So to be able to adapt and model that around, just best practices as well as our institutional nuances was something that we were very comfortable doing. And I think it really has lended itself to a lot of the success we've had, the right people, the right processes, and being flexible, because this has been, as I mentioned earlier, just one curveball after the next.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and Sean, I don't know if you have anything to add, being in the IT space when it comes to considering what to put in place.
So I would add, for me, it's a little bit different in a sense that I'm kind of in the middle of our organization, and certainly campus-wide emergency preparedness falls elsewhere. However, IT is going to be a large component of an emergency, but also from an IT point of view, we have to plan for emergencies for our own unit, which can have a tremendous impact on the college. So ensuring that we have incident response plans, that we have a good communication set up in terms of how our organization is going to communicate. One of the things that really came out of the disaster planning that we had was understanding where our risk was and how we can go back and strengthen areas to mitigate risk. And certainly at a time like this, you're going to depend on your infrastructure all the more. And if you have to go back and deal with those items, these are the areas that really take time. And then who are your partners and vendors? For us, I know that we had, as we went and did our planning, we looked inside the SUNY system, whether it be other CIOs and other colleges, but I also look at many of that we have our own SUNY Cloud, which is a unit called iTech, and we have SUNY System Administration, and how we would go and prepare for those items. And I do think as this came up, having gone and developed how we planned for how we were going to go and communicate and how we would go and mitigate risk, allowed us to go and deal with the specifics of what we were dealing with this time, as opposed to going and getting organized right from the beginning. I think it's really important to be organized and have an incident response plan so that you're able to then go and adjust to whatever you need to, whatever the specifics are for this plan. So I also look at it as it is a team sport, and my fellow panelists talk about outside the community, and for us, the community I mentioned is much of the IT community, but it's also inside the campus. And being inside the middle of the campus, I know I did reach out to some particular units, particularly our marketing and communication group, in terms of how we would go and handle communication when an incident like this comes up. And I know you're going to talk later about communication and how we go and organize that, but I think it's really important from an institutional point of view that there be one voice coming out and making sure that there's some kind of chain of command in terms of how we would communicate in an incident like this, how we're going and supporting technology, and we can be the definitive voice. But when it comes time for some of our staff questions and HR questions, really we have to make sure that what we're saying is in line with what the rest of the campus is saying.
That is a very good point, and being proactive is as much as possible. You know, we can't predict everything, but being proactive is very important. And that leads me to my next topic and question around communication. And this is for everyone on the panel that wants to answer. Can you speak to the communication plans that are on your campus and that you have in place to effectively manage a crisis? And that chain of command that Sean had mentioned.
I can start on this one. I'll just say that I do think we have exceptionally strong leadership in our campus, and we're lucky our president's been here for 23 years. So we were very strong in that sense. And we have a good marketing and communications group. And in regular meetings, it is fairly clear that the administration will speak on these matters. And there is a process in terms of where, what I will say and who I'll say it to, and then what I'll go and pass up as questions that are bubbling up and need to be addressed at a higher level. And I can understand it's very difficult at a time like this in terms of the quantity of questions and all the items that need to be said. And then also coordinating with SUNY is particularly an important aspect to it. But I know inside of our unit, looking from a unit point of view, as we moved our staff off campus, we set some goals in terms of making sure that we met people where they were, depending on what their concerns were, that we were not going to leave anyone behind. We were going to go and the people who needed more support, we were going to go and provide that support. So I look at that from a departmental level, and that we would follow the proper chains of command in terms of communication and be patient. Tell people what we know, but tell them to be patient where we needed to.
Great. And Larry?
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments as well. Our marketing and communications folks, our chief communications officer has been literally, I think we're getting tired of looking at each other, but we've been attached at the hip since February, very long days, because the communication is so critical. Not just to students, to faculty, to staff, and folks who are here, our external communication as well, certainly around the medical center and around the non-traditional parts of the pandemic that we're handling, the testing center in our one of our parking lots, the field hospital that's going up. So it's important to communicate as much as you can, as often as you can, without over messaging. And I think that's sort of a delicate balance. You don't want the daily communications, the daily emails, and the dilution of the message, which can happen and happens oftentimes in a crisis, and where balancing messaging from SUNY, messaging from the governor's office, messaging, locally. So we always say, we're a state university, but in a town, in a county, that still has those competing interests and those local partners. So common messaging and coordination of communication has been, I think, and when we do our after action reports, will be a common symptom of where some of the things went awry when the messaging went, off on its own.
I do think Larry makes a good point too with the external communication. If it's a campus specific incident, it's easy to get a hold of, per se, your faculty, staff, students via email. We have a SUNY alert system that gets pushed out. But how do you contact the external constituents? Specifically on a college campus, I'm thinking of parents and guardians that, how do you get information to them? So if it's, a fire and run in the dorms and parents see it on the news, or they maybe hear something from their student, how do you get as a campus official notification out to those that aren't in your email chain? The university has right now a website that they've been putting updates for students, for resources, faculty, staff resources, but it's also a place where parents, guardians, or even community members can still go and not have to worry about, I don't have a UAlbany email address, I'm not on their alumni listserv to find out information. And I think that's important to also remember, how can external people still get information about what's happening on the campus, whether it's in this type of incident or any type of incident. Again, if it's just campus focus, that's even more important than if it's obviously a broader incident. And how does that message go out and try to reach as much as possible, even, Facebook pages, ways that you can do it. But again, having not everybody doing something different at the same time, but having that central line of communication, but remembering you do have these different groups with different information needs too. And I think our campus is doing an excellent job, utilizing both the internal and external methods of communication right now, at least in this current situation.
Great. And Stephen, I didn't know if you had anything that you would like to add to that.
I will not reiterate what the fellow panelists have said. I think all of those points are very crucial. The one main piece that I worked with our Office of Communications and Marketing since I started here was defining what is the difference between a risk and a crisis communication. And I think that's one of the main pieces. When Christy had mentioned, we do have an alert system and there's different modes that are utilized. Do you then utilize that to send something out in an emergent form? So that's really something, especially educating the powers that be and our leaders to understand what communication channels are available, as well as we have to meet people where they're at. So Christy mentioned Facebook. So you're looking generational, as well as, is it a video or a message? Okay, well, that's the difference between Twitter and Instagram as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and along the same lines of communication, are there pockets of people that need more communication or less communication? And is there a way to make sure that you have a plan in advance to ensure that all the stakeholders are being reached? And I know we touched on that part a bit, but are there any sort of pockets of people that you would say need more communication, less communication?
Yeah, I'd say it's really dependent. You have to know your community. And that's one of the best parts here, especially myself being new here at UAlbany, was relying on my teammates and my counterparts to let us know where that information is. So some individuals never look at their email. They will not scroll past 2 swipes on their phone. So you have to make sure that your information is up front. So basically you call the bluff, bottom line up front. What do I want you to get out of this message? Boom, there it is. And if it's something that we want to share with students, again, it's putting that, and it might be multiple postings on a social media platform. But there are some parts of the community that don't have access. For instance, we send students home. They might only utilize their phones for everything. So it's looking at making sure the communications can get out where they need to. And so that's making sure we partner. We do have communication plans, but that is really, to Larry's piece earlier, it's great to have something to start with, but you have to be flexible, nimble, and Sean had mentioned patient. You have to be patient to make sure your message is getting to your entire community.
Great, thank you.
I
learned something. I learned bluff. This is good. It's a good strategy. Thank you for that.
I do want to also follow. Go ahead, Sean.
Go ahead. Okay, I was going to say, like, being in the middle of the organization, and first of all, I'm concerned about communication overload at certain points. And I know I've been in meetings since 10, and I've got like 60 emails in my inbox right now, and I'm already filtering out much of it as it is. But I think the strategy that we've taken is we do have a communication plan. And I look at it as communication to our stakeholders and then communication to our staff. And so we focused in communication to our staff, how we'll work through our organizational structure and utilize that. And I look at it from my position, how can I go and help my management team to go and to deliver the information to their staff that they might need to answer. And then so we have regular communication back and forth, and we've opened up different video sites and different ways to chat with one another and handle that. Then from our stakeholder point of view, we've tried to look at the services we've offered. So examples of that would be that we were offering laptops and internet devices to students. And we've developed solutions for some of the academic departments to utilize virtual applications and use Adobe Acrobat or Adobe tools inside their classes. So in there, we tried to use a communication of both communicating directly to the people who would be using the services and the people that would be receiving questions about it. So, and the other part we would be doing is the telecommuting. So for instance, we sent out a lot of information to department chairs and to the faculty about solutions that we're providing, knowing that some people don't read their email faculty, and who are they then going to go and complain to or ask? They're going to go and ask their department chairs. So trying to layer the communication above and below and give people the answers so that if somebody doesn't know something, they'll ask somebody who has read the communication to do it. So we did the same thing for students and for faculty so that they would be able to know and just kind of look at this network of communication will work out in the long run.
I do think there's two different types of communication or multiple types of communication. One is to communicate how a campus is responding to an incident. Like, you have to evacuate your dorm by a specific time or we're moving classes remotely. There's also, I think, communication from the campus in need of assistance during a response. And I mean, we're looking at, the easy one to look at would be making sure you have good communication, obviously, with local first responders, police, ambulance, local hospitals, but also services that you might need to support your students in your campus. So I'm thinking local food banks, local mental health professionals, communication like that too. So if your campus has a plan to be able to communicate with those groups and to be able to get assistance back to your campus. So again, it's not communication from the campus about what campus is doing, but communication with other entities to help the campus kind of respond and recover to those incidents. And that type of communication obviously is going to be different than talking to parents or releasing information to students. But those lines are key. And if you're talking about a response that's needed immediately, again, like with a first responder response, having those lines of a clear line of communication and a relationship prior to know exactly who do we contact for this or who do we contact for that, I think is an important part too of any sort of planning process too. And even from the prevention process, does your campus, members of your campus know who to communicate with if there's a student's having a mental health crisis on a Saturday or 2 o'clock in the morning, or a faculty member gets an email. So there's these other types of communication too that are part of the whole incident response that campuses do have to prepare for too, in addition to relating information to their constituents about what the campus is doing for, again, a response or recovery purpose of an incident.
Thank you. And Larry?
I think all of the relevant points around that have been covered by my colleagues. So I know you want to move to get to. There's a lot of other material to cover, so I'll abstain for now.
Okay, well, thank you all for talking about, the different levels of communication and what types of people need what communication in what instances. Before we move on to talking about different topics, I do want to ask if anyone has a question, please place it in the chat. And Joyce, do we have any questions so far?
We do not have any questions at the moment.
Okay. All right. So get those questions in. And so this next one, what have you learned about planning as this pandemic unfolds? Obviously, no one was expecting this, predicting this, but what are some things that you've learned throughout the process?
I think one of the main parts, I'll quickly start us off with this, is Sean had mentioned patience. It's patience on my part. I am an emergency practitioner, so I'm very knowledgeable on some of this. I don't know everything, but I know how to work and build a team together to accomplish that. So with this part, here's another one for you, Marissa. My R&D model is rip off and duplicate, and always give credit. But part of that is really looking at what's been done. So Larry had mentioned starting on H1N1. I also had started my career as emergency manager on that. So it was looking back to some of the long-term pieces we had done, but this is very different. But there's a lot of similarities to go with that. So I'd say really planning in regards of this is just writing everything down. I've started a process internally with our executive council as well as the incident management team and task force, just calling take a knee. Pretty much it's pausing our daily meetings at such a time, and it's once a week, to look forward and then look backwards. So then we can stop and really make sure that our progress and plans are being able to be as nimble as Larry's mentioned before. The curveballs come from multiple avenues, policymakers inside and out of the university.
Thank you.
And I'll jump onto that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead, Sean, please.
Okay, well, I was going to add, my dad has a saying, and it's react, but don't overreact. And so as questions come up, I think it's important to address them. And we talk about patience, and people have questions that we don't have answers to at this time. And I think just being open and transparent and honest with people and saying, that's a good question, and we're working on it, and I'm hoping that we'll have an answer soon, but I just want you to know we're working on it, and we're going to go and find a solution. But also, I think the planning, when I go back and look at the planning that's done and the conversations and how you get people to work together, you really can't estimate the importance of having that and having a strong base to start with and being organized to begin with. And because the other thing that I've learned is some of the big infrastructure things really take a long time to go and adjust to. If you're not, if you're like in some areas, we can go and make little pivots and be ready to go into support. But some of the other items are just going to take a long time, and it's just going to leave you behind the 8 ball if you're there. So, so I think in some ways we've done a good job in the preparation, and in others we've learned a lot, and we know where to go and work on our risk next.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, and I think I saw one of the questions in the chat real quick was about a plan B. I think it was specific to electronics, but I'll say all of our approaches that have been successful have been really having a plan A, plan B, and plan C. And as we move into, I won't say recovery, but as we start thinking about recovery and what the summer looks like and what the fall semester looks like, the posture of, plan A would be continuing in sort of a hybrid mode, campus-wide, essential versus non-essential employees, non-traditional approaches to, to academics and online learning and all the things that I'll say are our current normal. Plan B would be sort of if things got worse and we had to have additional restrictions. And then Plan C would be if things were magically returned to normal and, you know, we were 6 months in the past and hadn't gone through any of this. So it's not just a matter of having one or two tools in the toolbox, but I think it's really being, and Steve mentioned it, you know, the being nimble. I think we use that phrase probably 1,000 times a day because it is so unpredictable. I think, well, you know, the way to classify this is consistently inconsistent as it relates to our expectations, some of the messaging, some of the things we predict that we expect to happen and don't. So nimble is definitely the mantra of the day.
And I think too, for planning, it's important to obviously have a macro campus plan, but to encourage your departments and offices to have micro plans. And that I know has been helpful, at least in the School of Education ourselves. We had our own, depending on each office, had micro plans, so we were able to, the campus can then respond in that broader macro level. But then how do we continue our operations, continuity of operations and instruction, and supporting faculty, supporting students with the resources we have. So you do have to have multiple level plans, which goes back to having all parties involved with the planning. So it's great if your campus has a plan, but do your faculty know about the plan? Do your students know about the plan? And so if the campus has a plan, does your specific school or college have a plan? And does, you know, a specific major have a plan? Do your advisors have a plan? Student affairs. So you do have to have also these micro plans that are supported by the macro plan. But it's important to know because macro resources across the campus are also different at the micro level. Some offices, everyone may be proficient in GoToMeeting or Zoom, where in other offices might not, but what technology do they use that then they can utilize? So having those two-level plans, I think, is extremely important during both a response and a recovery phase.
That's great. Great advice and lessons learned. And I know that we do have a couple questions in the chat. Joyce, could you share with us some of those?
Yes. One of them said, what kind of communication plans have been put in place that support international students, especially those in countries like China, where many platforms are unavailable? Another one, that one I believe we just covered, is there a plan B in case there are general failure of electronic devices?
Okay, so let's tackle that first one. If any of the panelists have any feedback on that question.
Sure, I'll just kind of start quick. We had been working through COVID really from the beginning of January when this started in China. The University at Albany has a large group of international students, not only coming from that country, but also study abroad. And so the main part was the lack of timely communication. And I don't mean that on any individual. I mean, you're talking time zone differences. So we're sending an email to somebody while they're sleeping. And so it was a matter of how quick can we get a response? And then they ask questions. How quick can we get back to them? So I think this really took our Center for International Education and Global Studies really to look at how they communicate. And that was pretty much how we incorporated into our communication plans was, hey, do we need to send an alert? Because we have that ability within our mobile piece to send that out to direct individuals. So I started to utilize that emergency piece, but again, that's for crisis communication. So we were very judicious with sending that out because that's also something that individual families could have. So it was more of, hey, there's a message coming into you from CEHC, that's our international school. Please take a look through that email and get back to us as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think for us, we had very similar experiences, not only the time zone differences, but not being able to control, I use that term loosely, or having messaging coming from different areas. So SUNY was messaging to students in the study abroad program. We were messaging to students, and some of those messages were not necessarily, the timing wasn't there, or there would be a changing priority from, to Stephen's point, the time the first message was sent and the time the first response was received. Using WeChat or using the methods or translating messages into the forums and the various languages that the students are used to using All of that was happening with a very dynamic situation with the State Department, and, changing guidances and international travel, and what was happening. So that for us, that was really the early part. And then as we prepared, as the students were recalled by SUNY, we were preparing and standing up a quarantine on our Southampton campus and preparing to accept 26 of those students, 25 of which weren't even Stony Brook students. They were from our colleagues at FIT. So all of those things happening at once, and then the common theme being trying to manage the messaging and the timing and all of those the nuances that were pointed out.
Thank you.
Another question. There is, what avenues are best to get training done when academic personnel are only available during club hour?
So that's actually something we're still developing here. When I first started here, it was how do we train everybody on what is incident command, what is emergency management at large. So I kind of chunked that down to a functional base, creating an outward-facing website that pretty much started in the classroom. What do you do? What should prepare you as a professor? And it's also looking to partner with our HR. I see our training individuals actually on this call as well. Part of this discussion from this specific disaster was how can we utilize that on a virtual platform? Because then it's being taken at their leisure whenever they do have availability, because they are structured in regards of that timing. So it's meeting our community members where they're at.
There are also too a lot of good online resources. The FEMA trainings are online, so you as your institution can recommend, if you're interested about learning more, here's some online resources, online trainings that people can do. And again, like Stephen had said, it's meeting people where they are and offering them flexibility and online trainings, whether they're hosted by you or by something that already is already posted online, is helpful. And it's the same thing with your students. I mean, don't forget too to train your students. They're on your campuses, they will be affected by this. Stress inoculation works in all different types of emergencies. And I mean, it's just like driving. When you have a new driver, they are not very good and they're very nervous. And the more practice that they get, they become less nervous and then are speeding on the thruway in no time at all. So it's, very similar. So stress inoculation. So, looking at training opportunities, what kind of training can you also offer, again, to students and even to parents and guardians of your students? It's good for them to know too, that if there's this type of incident, how are they supposed to respond? It might make them feel better too if an incident occurs, knowing that they know how to respond and that they can talk about it with their student or their child, or and how they respond to. So it's looking at opportunities to meet, again, what Stephen said, meet people where they are, but looking at all groups that need to be, that it's beneficial that they have that training.
Absolutely. Yeah, and with any emergency, and especially with this pandemic, there are sometimes anxieties and fears. And how have you all, what have you all done to ease the anxiety of your team and even yourself, if there are some strategies to keep you calm?
I guess one thing is, I know this is it's a temporary item, and this too shall pass, and we just have to stay calm and collected. I go back to what Larry had mentioned. I know I'm most calm when I feel that like things are in control. So certainly working with my team and doing scenario planning and feeling that we're trying to stay a little bit somewhat ahead. And then I think the other component is how I'm supporting my staff and how I'm supporting really my management team so they can support their staff. And I mean, we're all being inundated with all kinds of leadership emails and those kinds of things. So I do go through and try to send some of that positivity back to them, and that they can go and share it with their staff, and making sure that they have the communication channels open with the staff that they're dealing with.
Great, thank you.
To talk for easing teams' fears, I found that keeping in communication, which, you know, being remote is a little bit harder, but having time to meet with them, and even if it's just, how are you doing? Because sometimes just the act of someone saying, I'm not doing so well here, and just talking about it, even though, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, remembering that, you know, I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm not doing counseling, but giving them that opportunity to at least talk about it, I think is helpful. And then from a leadership perspective too, to not show, I can't remember if it was Sean or Steven saying to react but not overreact, you know, that you're reacting and, you know, that you're leading them through this, but that you yourself are not panicking. And that will then lead, trickle down to everyone else to see, okay, they're not panicking. So, you know, I that makes me feel a little bit better. And people have said that. And, but also, again, it goes back to, if people feel prepared, they hopefully will have less anxiety when the incident actually happens. And it even isn't so much of, yes, the drills are very helpful, but, you know, doing drills for this type of thing is, you know, we can all work from home and pretend that there's a pandemic and you can't go outside. That's kind of hard to do, but, you know, that we have a plan already set. So if something does happen, you can say, okay, well, we have a plan. So at least there's one less piece that they have to be anxious about. And so they can, if you have less things to be anxious about, it makes your anxiety maybe a little bit easier. And so helping to control some of the things we can at least control ahead of time. But people are going to be, you know, worried about themselves and also their families. And that's an important piece too, to remember that you're dealing with not just the person, your employee, your staff member, your student, but you're also dealing with the people they're worrying about too. And so there's multifaceted pieces to, you know, helping people with their anxieties and things that they're worrying about during an incident. So, and that's a difficult piece, is because you're not talking to their parent, you're talking to the student, but you know they're worrying about their parent too. So how do you mix that all together? It's hard, but communication and, you know, giving them an opportunity to talk about it, I think is very helpful. And then referring them also to mental health professionals so that they can work with a professional to kind of deal with, you know, what they're going through is very helpful. And I think people try to solve everybody's problems when there's people out there who are professionals at that. So being able to, you know, have the resources to refer them to the people too that can help them and support them through the process is extremely important.
Exactly. Yeah. And Larry, how have you exercised your leadership skills to ease community fears? Or have you seen other campus leaders do this well?
Well, I think both. I could answer that, you know, for both respects. I mean, I think, you know, our president has done an amazing job, and our chief deputy have done an amazing job staying connected. But I think, and this will sort of be like a takeaway, having senior leadership engaged and having them be visible. So Dr. Bernstein has been doing, our president has been doing podcasts, weekly podcasts, interviewing and leading the podcast and interviewing various leaders who are involved in the response from the campus side, from the medical center. So, and that's, I mean, thousands and thousands of people are being touched by that, but it's twofold really. We're getting good information out, but it's a symbolic representation of leading from the front and having that senior leadership out there. And I think by virtue of that, assuaging fears that there is that senior level connection. And I'll say that I have been plugged into, you know, at that level and working with them so I can filter that information down. And someone even mentioned it, you know, earlier, communicating, even if you don't have something to say, just to let people know that you're in touch with them and that you're sharing as much information, and being conscious of the fact that there's so much changing guidance, regulatory and within the system. And just, you know, be mindful of that as we continue to do that. So it's leading from the front, keeping everyone informed, even if it means you have nothing to do, but letting them know that, you know, you're updating them to say that you'll be in touch soon.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, and I know that we have 5 minutes left. It went by quickly, but I would like to get to that one question, Joyce, that you had mentioned before we wrap up.
It is developing a communication plan that was clear and quick and effective. someone said they often found that they get the language correct on time, but by the time that they get the message out, the guidance had changed and they had to modify it again.
So yeah, part of that piece here is our Office of Communications and Marketing was really looking at some of that, where we were developing the message and it went out, and then we had to like, oh, now we look like we're behind the curve with it. Part of that is understanding what is the message? What are you trying to accomplish with that specific communication? And if it is something, then part of that is empowering my folks within the communications and marketing to press on that this needs to happen sooner. Thankfully, everybody from President Rodriguez down through the task force has been able to respond and understand that push sometimes, as well as for everybody else, especially from myself and the marketing folks, to understand that sometimes these communications, especially as a state university, are not something that we can individually make, and we do have to take pause to wait for either the chancellor or the governor to give some direction.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would also add, I find it very helpful, and you mentioned talking to your Department of Marketing and Communications, and like when this is all over, or whatever, to sit down with them and develop a plan if you feel that's something that needs to be done, and reaching out and asking for people, you know, for their expertise and help, and they're always happy to help and give some tips. And that is more relevant, I'm sure, at a small campus, for sure.
Absolutely. And did we get to everyone's question, Joyce?
Yes, everyone's questions has been answered.
I do want to fill in just a little bit with the plan B for the communication if electronics go down.
Sure.
I don't want to age myself, but I did go to school during an era when there was no internet or email or smartphones. So looking back to those, taking inventory of the resources that you have, local news and radio. If electronics, like if cell service goes down, you can use those. And maybe not all of your constituents would have access to a manual radio or even cable TV, but those are things that you can use. And so thinking about what do you have? And that's again where the planning comes into. Plan for what if we don't have electronic communications, no cell service? How do we still get out messages to people? Rotary phones, hardwired phones. A lot of homes don't have those anymore. So if you were, as a leader at your home like we are now, and there was no power and you had to communicate, how would you do that? So, you know, trying to think back to prior to cell phones, how was a snow day communicated to K-12 schools or any other type of emergency in a college campus? So I did at least want to put that out there, that there are still resources that aren't cell phone or internet related. And that those are obviously options. And, you know, if you decide to keep that as a plan B, to make sure you tell students, if there is no cell service, we will contact our local radio stations and news services to get news out. So that way they're also aware to look for information there.
That's fabulous. Thank you. And on your screen here, you'll see the contact information for all of our panelists. If you have any sort of question or want to collaborate with them, feel free to reach out. My email address is right on the top there as well. We will be sending out a survey at the end of this, so please feel free to let us know your thoughts, feedback, questions, or topics that we can cover for the next webinars that we do. The next one is going to be May 21st, and it's supporting the mental health of campus professionals, which aligns very well with what we are talking about here today. So I hope that you are able to join us for that. And you can follow us on Twitter. And I just want to thank the panelists so much. I know that you are very busy, and wishing you luck during this challenging time. And we're, you know, all here to support each other, which is a good feeling. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's great to meet everyone.
Thank you.